So Sabina, how did you discover photoromanzi, and why did you think you could make art about it? What interests you about the format that made you think that you could do some paintings?
Well, how I discovered them is actually a photoromanze in itself. I was quite young, and it was my very first job. I worked for, does this work? Yeah. For Roberto Cavalli, the fashion designer, which was not such a prominent fashion house at the time. And I was a junior designer, and I was completely overwhelmed. And I lived in Florence, and couldn't speak a word of Italian, and English was not an option. Few people spoke English. I went by with French, but it was hard. And I went on Sundays to the flea markets and discovered these old photoromanzi from the 50s. And I thought, well, I understand that there's a picture and there is a word, and maybe this means it's correlated. So in a way, it was sort of a primitive form of Rosetta Stone. And I taught myself it's somewhat Italian with that way. And then at one point, I brought them to Cavalli and said, wouldn't that be great if we used those? Because he printed with silk screens on leather. I said, can we print them on the leather? And he said, this is a horrible idea. What a horrible idea. It's not sexy at all. And everything had to. I said, okay. And I forgot about it. And 10 years later, when I lived in New York, all of a sudden I got it in my head to draw them and enlarge them and use them because I was always interested in high and low culture. And I just did a whole series which were shown at PS1 in 1987 in an exhibition. And then I sort of stayed with the genre.
And is it the dramatics? I mean, the ILO I understand, but the whole thing with the comic, is this the only series you did that had actually words in a comic book? The idea.
I always I took them from old photoromanze. Then they were also, you could still get them in the stands in the 80s, and I was just fascinated by the photography, the camera, and those very naive dialogues and drama in itself. So and then later on, I started to photograph films and sort of create my own photoromanze. And for this exhibition, I sort of did an assemblage of.
So is this the first time that you use film as a source for this?
No, I have done that before.
Yes,
before. I have done that for a show I've done actually at one point they were shown at Barney's in New York in the windows. I did a whole series. Yes. Yes. And it was with English subtitles, and it was called Divas of Doom.
Well, of course, part of the thing is that they're really dramatic. I think that the first one I was kind of looking into it a little bit today, and I think Italy started the phenomenon, and then it spread to France and Turkey, some Middle Eastern countries, some Latin American, where they believe it's actually kind of the origin of the telenovela, the television telenovela. But they were a form of communication that was very, very basic and very inexpensive. And, the two main Italian ones were called Grand Hotel and Bolero.
Grand Hotel. Exactly.
Grand Hotel and Bolero, yes, they're like this sort of mystery names, and they were published by Italy's two main publishers, Rizzoli and Mondadori, and so they were really a source of a way of reaching out to more remote areas and people that couldn't even afford a movie ticket, but also that they didn't know to read much. That's why it's so terse. The dialogue,
and it's the text. In the vitrine you can see my collection of vintage photoromanzi. The text in the early ones, it's written by hand in an almost childlike calligraphy, which I try to emulate in my artwork as well. And sadly, the photoromanzi, it do not exist anymore. They went out of print because the cost of printing is too expensive, and it's also, I mean, people have a very different idea of entertainment now. It's
but there was a synergy wasn't a word I used at the time, but it was a lot of like young actors started with Fotoromanzi. A lot of models used to use them to transition. Some like Sophia Loren and Gina Lollobrigida used them to transition from photography to
Ornella Muti.
Ornella Muti more recently, yeah. So it was a way to get to get known, and the dramatics were part of the fun, and that's why I like that we ended up with this film. We started in a completely different place, and we ended up with this, and I really like it. First of all, because it gives a direct approach, but also because it really is this sort of idea of the Italian, what Italy was for the Italians at the time, after the war, and this projection with imagination and dreams, and also what the image that foreigners have of Italy, So I think it plays with both ideas of it.
I mean, what is so remarkable in Cieco Bianco is also the sense of humor that Fellini, without his later on much more theatrical and surreal, this has sort of a simplistic, very funny, fast way of showing this. I mean, these when the director, and when the frozen moment when the sheik swings his sword, and the utterly bored belly dancer. I mean, it's
yeah, and I think that it's been when she goes into the offices, and then when she gets sort of swept away through the car before, and there's the scene where they all come down from from the stairs, and that's really is almost like Fellini finds himself, because that's the first time that you really see it. The soundtrack it gives you circus right away, but that one moment where they come down in costume, and she sees when she sees the kid dressed as a Moor, and then she goes and they all come out. It's like the characters from it's magic. Is that world? So I thought it was an appropriate choice.
And of course, he had to have the fire, the swallower in the end. Yeah. That couldn't resist it. And his wife.
Giulietta Masina,
Giulietta Masina had a minor, incredible, poignant role.
Yeah, yes, small, and then she became. Of course, everybody knows Nights of Cabiria. If you haven't, is one of Fellini's greatest films, and she, it's so dedicated to her, to the Cabiria character, the prostitute. So it's quite wonderful, and because I have a tormented relationship with Italian films. We started differently, and we went to this, and then Sabina was like, no, that's too gaudy, and then was like, no, I think it's a good thing. So we ended up on this, and then of course she started painting something from Antonioni without even knowing that he was the it was the treatment was his.
No, I had no. Maybe you will see the drawings and paintings upstairs. I was really focused on Cieco Bianco, also on Sorpasso, which we might see a little bit later in the month. And at one point I was cheeked out. I couldn't, and I watched La Notte again by Antonio, and I said, oh, it's such beautiful shots and camera and this thing. So all of a sudden I went rogue, but instinctively didn't know.
But because the art show is just touches on several great filmmakers, and it's not necessarily only focused on the Fotoromanzi, and this particularly is a pop genre in Italy at the time that was called telefoni bianchi, white telephones, which was it was very romantic comedies and set in the lower middle class, and it was a specific genre.
Well, wasn't it that the white telephone was a symbol for affluence?
Yeah, but the movies were targeted to middle class. Yes. It was a projection of dreams
and glamour and
We can chat, but do you have any questions? None? Well, then we should go. Oh, there is. Hold on. Wait for the mic.
Oh. I'm just trying to imagine what it would have been like if Antonioni had done it. I mean, it's unimaginable. It would
Yeah,
have
there
been-
was. I found some details on what it was. I think it was called Dear Evan, and he was a man going to Rome and leaving behind his girlfriend, and then he has a fling with a fotoromanzo actress, and he ends up in the fotoromanzo, himself. So it's kind of the flip side. But then the girlfriend comes from Imola, because I was, that's where they're from, and then she sets him straight. But I think it has a tragic ending because it was, it was Antonioni and.
And yeah, you can.
But the documentary, we don't have it here, but we found it, the little 10 minutes, and hopefully, we'll be able to put it up, not today, but maybe sometime. I'm looking at Sam because, so upstairs with the exhibit, it's really interesting, and it chronicles, and you see all the women reading them, and you see the, the stacks. It's a pretty cool 10-minute piece, and it's Antonioni.
There was just, I'm sorry, just to finish,
Yeah,
there
of
was a
course.
little bit of foreshadowing of 8.5, I thought. in
Yeah,
this.
yeah. That's. I think it's really, and this is a Fellini's first film, so it's not, it's not bad for first.
Marriage of Nina and Rota, and you hear the circus, you see it, and you see him repeating the theme throughout his career.
Yeah,
It's actually a seminal, wonderful piece.
yeah. No. I it's very true. It's really a.
All the antecedents of his work are here expressed in the It's a wonderful selection, and thank you.
I think before we go upstairs, there was a couple of hands. There's one. Hold on for a minute, just because if we don't, we can't tape it without the mic.
Hi, I was just wondering if you could talk about your transition from fashion to art and how you made that leap.
Oh, well, I was hired as a textile designer, as basically drawing prints that were supposed to be silkscreened on that leather. That was Cavalli's claim to fame. So he always wanted to design birds of paradise and paisleys, and I was incredibly bored with that. So, but I was always an independent artist. I was not I didn't design the clothes. It was the printing. It was the artwork. So it wasn't such a leap, and I just took any work I could get. And of course, I lived in Munich at the time, and Florence was very tempting. There used to be a night train from Munich to Florence. Yeah. And so I lived there for 2 years and finally spoke a little bit of Italian.
One more? No, let's go upstairs. Thank you, Sabina.
Okay. Thank you, Giulia. Thank you.